Hey folks, so today's episode probably looks a bit familiar, at least to some of you, and there's a good reason for that. See, Akabaka recently released a vastly expanded version of their DreadX collection entry I covered, which brings us here, to Sucker for Love First Date. Like its predecessor, it's a visual novel with some gameplay elements, which thematically mingles romantic comedy with dashes of occult horror. That said, did I find myself enamored with the overall experience, or was this date one I was eager to cut short? I'm your host Arlyeon, let's find out together. The search for an ideal partner can be difficult even at the best of times, but for our inexplicably named protagonist, his preference more or less requires that the stars align. Literally, since he's been trying to land a date with a non-Euclidean girl for the better part of a year. That said, his luck finally starts to change after he receives a questionable tome which allows him to enact the dread rite of dating. Now all that's left to do is figure out how to get through the evening without dying, going insane, or dooming all of existence. So premise-wise, this does start out similar to how Sucker for Love did during DreadX Collection 2. That said, it's not long before an astute player will begin to pick out differences in the dialogue and even new scenes, as well as new characters. That's right, this time around, we're not just limited to courting the curvy Cthulhu-esque Lynetta. Once the initial chapter is complete, you get access to a brand new story segment, which not only introduces a romantic rival straight from the shores of Carcosa, it also adds a few more complications narratively. Notably, it offers new questions to explore like, how bad can things get if you decide to two-time gods? Honestly, the segment's overall pretty neat and offers up some decent variety due to how thematically distinct Esther feels from her rival. What's more, there's a decent amount of Easter eggs and consequences to explore, including things related to your actions in the first chapter. Seriously, compared to the first route, there's a total of 6 endings to pursue, which, while bite-sized, are still pretty darn entertaining, and there's some other optional bits scattered throughout. And then we get to the third chapter, which, again, is different. For one thing, it is the least readily accessible, as it relies on players finding a trio of secrets scattered through the first 2 chapters without closing the game. For another, it's just a different sort of beast altogether, which I suppose is fitting given it's focused on Nyanlothotep, the Clawing Chaos. Whilst the earlier chapters provide more comedic tones, which occasionally veer into horror, this one provides a more focused slice of creepiness, as well as the most unpredictable gameplay experience in the entire game. Which, right, so whilst I said this is a visual novel, it's not just that, given that you don't advance through dialogue options. Like, yes, there is some optional dialogue you get from chatting with the girl when she's in your room, but you progress through the game by enacting rituals from your unhallowed tomes, in the hopes that you'll curry favor with the outer gods and earn smooches. Seriously, darling, if you're gonna sell out reality, you could at least aim to be consort. Anyways, the rituals essentially serve as fairly basic puzzles which ask you to click around your room to get the necessary components and enact them in the right way. Oh, and to drag your mouse across the incantation without going too fast. Sounds simple, right? Well, let me tell you about Chapter 2. If you happen to struggle with maintaining a steady clip with your mouse or jittering off the lines, you're going to have a time with Esther. Because, she doesn't approve of people messing up their lines when she's giving a heartfelt performance. The results are heart-rending, to say the least. Which is about the point I found myself really grateful for the fact that the game does have a save system, by the way. Admittedly, it's checkpoint-oriented and only allows you to start at certain key points, but it's still quite helpful, especially once you start to dabble with consequences, like performing conflicting rituals from 2 different gods. That said, it's Chapter 3 where things really heat up. Whilst it doesn't have the same sort of narrative diversity its predecessor has, it makes up for it by offering you a unique route which sees you fending off a number of otherworldly dangers. What's worse, These threats are randomized, forcing you to try and identify the various threats and counteract them, even as they strive to overwhelm you and just generally be unpleasant and creepy. Not only does this provide an interesting array of puzzles to contend with, it genuinely feels tense, especially given you're provided a limited amount of time to parse out solutions in order to avoid perishing. It was actually tricky enough that it took me a handful of times before I was able to comfortably navigate that sequence. Though, comfortably might not have been the right word for it. Sucker for Love actually managed to make me uneasy during that segment. Maybe it was because I was wearing headphones at the time, but the sound design for Chapter 3 really helps to amp up the creep factor. That said, the overall quality isn't limited there. I happen to be really fond of the various themes used throughout the game, enough so that I idled in it as I was writing this review. Also, the voice acting is stellar.
Darling, what's that on your forehead? It looks like a lipstick mark. That's not from another god, is it, darling? Because if it is, well, you die here.
I legitimately lost my shit a few times during some choice dialogue exchanges, only to sober up real quick when things got a bit more tense. And it's not just the audio that's great, by the way. I also really enjoyed the visuals too. Like, character design-wise, if you're into tall, extra thick monster girls who can unperson you like nobody's business, you've got it made. The way they can range from endearing to creepy on a dime is delightful. That said, I was also quite fond of things like the shift in ambience as you perform rituals, or progress in chapters where familiar areas and sights slowly become less so. And this brings us to the conclusion, so if it's not abundantly clear by this point, I'm thoroughly fond of Sucker for Love First Date, and this is despite the fact that visual novels aren't a medium I often engage with. That said, from start to finish, I was provided with a genuinely enjoyable combination of comedy and horror, which is executed cleverly enough that both elements are given their time to shine without ever really overstaying their welcome. All in all, it's just good, and the fact that the first chapter had enough new content there that I was enjoying it, and the sheer blast I had with all the options that were available in the second chapter, it's good. That said, mechanically, the way that Chapter 3 plays with the established mechanics really helps to make that a memorable sequence and a delightful conclusion to the game. Enough so that I will probably try and talk my girlfriend into playing this game at some point. Which is to say, folks, this game genuinely warrants being called a crit hit. Seriously, it's not enough that this title kept me diligently delving through all the paths it had to offer. It's also got me waiting to find out what's next in store, given that the developers announced a sequel in the works. I'm going to pick it up. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment, though I am pretty adamant about Estir being best girl, FYI. And if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. For the Discord savvy folks, click the video description to find a link to my community, the Crit Hit Cauldron, and to my Patreon so you can support me and the other members of Crit Hit so we can make more interesting content. Lastly, if you want to see me get dunked on in indie games live, check out my Twitch at twitch.tv/Arlyeon, though you'll also sometimes see me playing Monster Hunter Rise with my girlfriend. Okay, that said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.